the old question, do we have free choice? And if we do, does God know what we're going to do? If he knows what we're going to do, then how can we have free choice? If we do have real free choice, how could he possibly know what we're going to do? That's the contradiction. Why is it a contradiction? Because you can only really have one or the other. If God knows what's going to happen, it could only happen that way. It couldn't happen otherwise. If it can't happen otherwise, so then where's the choice?
He knows that we have the strength to...
It's questioning God's powers.
What does it mean to have choice? Free choice means there are many possible paths you could take, and it's up to you which one you take. If there's only one path, then there's no choice. Right? That's what free choice means. God knows what's going to happen means that before it happens, at the beginning of time, already there is a path that is going to happen. This is the way it's going to be. It couldn't be any other way. So then there's no choice. Yeah? It's a paradox. One of the rabbis, known as the Or Sameach, wrote that it's like on a cold night, sharing a bed with somebody, and you only have one blanket, and the blanket's a little bit too small to cover both of you. So what's going to happen? All night, you're going to pull the blanket towards yourself to keep yourself warm as you feel chilly, and that will expose the other person in the bed. They're going to start getting cold. So they're going to start pulling the blanket towards them, which exposes you, and you're going to start getting cold. And back and forth the whole night. Neither are you going to have a good sleep, because as soon as you feel cold, you pull the blanket. They feel cold, they'll pull the blanket, and the blanket is simply not big enough to cover both of you. So too, he says, the idea of free choice and God's knowledge are two concepts that cannot share the same space. They can't coexist, because the more you understand that we have free choice, the more you emphasize that, you're pulling the blanket away from God's knowledge. If we have free choice, we could go this way or that way. But when you think about, but God does know what you're going to do, so then that pulls the blanket away from free choice. You actually don't have free choice, because you had to do it that way. God knew you were going to do it that way. It couldn't be any other way. You thought you had free choice. You thought you chose it, but really, it was preordained, predestined. So it's a contradiction. The blanket is not enough to cover both of us. So what I want to look at is a few approaches from the sages of Israel over time, over the ages, in how to try and explain and reconcile this problem. How can we survive with it? First one I want to look at is the Rambam, Maimonides. Maimonides writes in the laws of tshuva, the laws of repentance, that a person has free choice. If you don't have free choice, so then you wouldn't be responsible for your actions. If you're not responsible, then you can't be rewarded or punished. You can't be expected to do good or evil. If it's all preordained, then it's not up to you. So it must be we have free choice. It's an absolute axiom of faith that we have free choice. Otherwise, the entire Torah is meaningless. Why should the Torah tell you to be good if you can't choose it? Or not be evil if it's not up to you? So the fact that there is morality means there must be free choice. Then he says, but at the same time, we know that God knows what's going to be. God knows the future. And so you might ask the question, that if God knows the future, how do we have free choice? It could only be the way God knows it. It couldn't be otherwise. So how does he reconcile it? So this is what Maimonides says. Look at the top. Know that the answer to this question, longer than the land is its measure, and broader than the sea. To answer this, it's a lifetime. It's a huge, huge issue. And that many great foundations and lofty mountains hang upon it. But understand well what I'm going to say. In other words, Maimonides says, I'm not going to tell you the whole thing, because that's bigger than the whole world to tell you this concept is so lofty and deep. But let me tell you one thing. Says Maimonides, God does not know with a mind that is distinct from his being, as is the case with man, whose being and mind are two distinct entities. Rather, he and his mind are one and the same, a concept that is impossible for the human mind to fully comprehend. Thus, just as man cannot discover and grasp the truth of the Creator, so too man cannot discover and grasp the mind of the Creator. In the words of the prophet, my thoughts are not like your thoughts, nor your ways like my ways. Therefore, we lack the capacity to know the nature of God's knowledge of all creations and all events. By this we know without doubt that the deeds of man are in his hands, and God does not compel him to do anything. So what's he said? What has Maimonides said? Anyone got it?
Pretty much can't understand.
That we can't understand. Basically, he said that God and his knowledge, his mind, are one thing. Unlike a human being, there's you and there's your mind. With God, it's all one thing. And so just like God is not knowable and not understandable, so too his knowledge is not understandable. In other words, Rambam is basically saying, why are you so surprised that we have a paradox here? We can't understand how God knows what we're going to do, but we have free choice. And everything else about God you do understand? Anything else about God you understand? But we don't understand anything about God. So you're talking about God and you're saying, we don't understand. What are you surprised? Of course we can't understand it. He's beyond us. His mind, the way he knows things, the way he knows the future, without affecting our free choice, we don't understand it. You surprised? It's God we're talking about. We don't understand anything about God. Him and his mind are one. Just like he's beyond our understanding, so too his mind are beyond understanding. So the fact is, we have free choice. The fact is, God knows what we're going to do, and we don't understand. That's Maimonides. That's how he explains it. Okay, the Ravid, who was a commentary on Maimonides. Most prints of Rambam, Mishnah Torah, his work of Jewish law, contains also the comments of the Ravid, Rabbi Avram ben David, who was a contemporary of Rambam, who attacked very viciously many statements of the Rambam. In fact, sometimes he uses quite harsh, almost abrasive language in attacking ideas that the Rambam writes. And all editions of the Rambam these days are printed with the Ravid's attacks on the side. They say that one of the reasons why the Ravid attacked so harshly is because the Rambam was so authoritative in his time, there was a fear that everyone was just going to blindly accept everything he says. So the Ravid wanted to balance things out, so he attacked him very strongly to show that halacha doesn't end with one person. Jewish law is something that's still open for debate. So he's very harsh sometimes. Here is one example, where on this comment of Maimonides, of the Rambam, the Ravid responds. Have a look. The author, referring to the Rambam, did not act in the manner of the wise. One ought not begin something that one is incapable of concluding. He begins by posing a difficult question, then remains with the difficulty and reverts to faith. It would have been better for him to have left it as a matter of faith for the innocent, instead of making them aware of the contradiction and leaving their minds in doubt. In other words, why are you coming and asking a question that you can't answer? That's not a smart thing to do. Don't bring up this philosophical question, a contradiction between God's knowledge and our freedom of choice, and then say, well, we don't understand the answer. People have faith, don't bother with these questions. People who do have these questions, you're not answering them anyway. So who are you helping? By bringing up a question and then leaving it dangling. So Ravid says, don't ask a question you can't answer. Don't bring up a question in faith and then leave people with the question and with no explanation. And furthermore, the Ravid says, even though there is no ultimate answer, it is proper to offer a partial answer and say the following. Were man's righteousness or wickedness dependent on the Creator's decree, meaning that his knowledge is the same as his decree, we would have a severe question. However, the Creator has removed this dominion from his hand and given it over to humans. Thus, his knowledge is not a decree. Rather, it resembles the knowledge of astrologers. So what's he saying? You have to separate between two concepts. There's knowing something and deciding something. Two very different things. I can know something, but I didn't decide it. Deciding means that I made it happen. Knowing means it happened and I'm aware of it. It's two very different things. So the Ravid says, if God's knowledge was a decree, was a decision, knowing something means you're deciding to make it happen, we've got a big contradiction. But it isn't. Knowing something is different to deciding. And the metaphor he gives is like an astrologer. What's an astrologer? Somebody who can look into the star signs of a person and see their destiny. I know what's going to happen to you because I can see this is your destiny. Is the astrologer making it happen to you? Causing it to happen? Deciding what your destiny is? No. They're just observing it. To know something, to be aware of it, to observe it, doesn't mean you're deciding it. So too, God looks into your future. He knows what you're going to do. But he's not deciding. He just knows.
Well, then that's the answer then. You
That's
do
it.
have the free choice.
Yeah.
But it's just that he knows what your choice is.
Yeah. Which makes us wonder, what was the question? What was the big contradiction in the first
Exactly.
place? He knows what you're going to do, but he didn't make you do it. Pretty simple, no?
But God still controls the entire world. Everything happens because...
Or does it?
Isn't
Does
God-
everything happen because of him? Or does or do we have the
we
choice
don't
to
believe
make
that
things
Hashem
happen?
created the world and then left it. He's constantly recreating the world every second.
Okay.
So it's not like it's separate. In this case, it sounds like that's the world, and he kind of knows what happens, but he's staying.
Right.
He's not interfering.
Yeah. So the Ravid here, first of all, he says, look, there's no complete answer, but here's a partial answer. And then he gives an answer which seems perfectly fine. Like, the whole contradiction is if God decides what happens. But he doesn't. He knows what happens, just like an astrologer knows what's going to happen. So there's no contradiction in the first place, it seems. Look at how he explains it. It is well known that the fate that governs everything that happens to a person, whether of great or small importance, was transferred by the Creator to the constellations, the star signs. However, he granted man the wisdom to have the power to take his destiny out from under the influence of the constellations. This is the power given to man to be either good or bad. So you have a destiny based on you were born at a certain time, the stars were aligned in a certain way, this is your destiny, this is how your life is going to be. But when we say that's your destiny, it means as long as everything stays the same, this is your destiny. If you become a better person, you improve yourself, you get a better destiny. You increase your blessing. If you become a worse person, then you demote yourself to a lower destiny. So you still have the ability to change your destiny, but however, whatever situation you're in, whatever your stars align to, this is what your destiny is as things stand at the moment.
Yeah.
So the Creator knows the power of the constellations, and also whether man's intellect will have the power to take the matter out from under their influence. Thus, his knowledge is not a decree. A regular astrologer can only tell you this is your destiny according to the way things stand at the moment. They can't know if you're going to improve or get worse and change your destiny. So an astrologer, and I don't mean any astrologer in Bondi Junction that has a little stall, but someone who has a real knowledge of astrology.
Like in
There's
the city
Jewish.
or something.
Yeah, exactly. So such a person, online. So they actually do have knowledge. There is in Torah there's sources for astrology. There's a whole Kabbalistic work about it. So somebody who really knows astrology can know what your destiny is according to the status quo, the way you are at the moment. They can't know if tomorrow you're going to transform yourself into a new person and then get a new destiny. But God does know, because he knows you, and he knows your powers, and he knows what you're going to do. So he knows what your destiny is. He knows whether you're going to change that destiny to a different destiny. So he knows all the variables. An astrologer can't tell you absolutely what's going to happen. God can, because he's better than an astrologer, because he knows the variables as well. But just like an astrologer is not deciding your destiny, just observing it, so too God is observing this is what's going to happen to you.
But is he just observing? Because isn't all the inclinations to improve or become worse also preordained?
Well, that's the thing. That's why here, the Ravid said this is not a complete answer. To divide between God knowing and God deciding is a little bit artificial. And he concludes, however, all this is not worthwhile. Better not get into this one, because even though this is a good, neat answer that you could present, and there is some level of truth to it, but it's not a complete answer. Because to say God doesn't decide what's going to happen, he has no power, he's like a passive observer, that's not God. That's not how God is. It doesn't really make sense. Because really, if God knows something, then that's what makes it happen.
God's one with his knowledge. So if Hashem's creating everyone at all times and is one with that, then he's one with people doing actions that may be against her, but he's actually creating that in real time.
Right. So what does it mean God is one with his knowledge? Just like you can't add to God, so too you can't add to his knowledge.
Isn't it the Noah, the knowledge,
And the known,
No.
yeah, it's all one.
It's all one.
Yeah, this is where it's said. It's from Rambam.
Right.
That's right. So what does that mean? It means that unlike a human being's knowledge, when you know something, there was a time you didn't know it and time you do know it. The information was added to you. You became broader, you expanded your mind by finding out the thing. It started with the fact and it ended with you. You were a result, not the cause. That's human knowledge. God's knowledge you can't say is the same thing. Because you can't say you add something to God, that information comes to him, that he finds out about it after it happened. I don't mean after in time, but because it happened. So to say that God is like an astrologer observing passively, it's actually not true. If God knows something, he knew it before it happened, not just in time, but in level. He caused it to happen. He's the cause of everything. He came first. So the astrologer metaphor is not such a strong one. And that's why Ravid says this is actually only a partial answer. not a full answer, and it's all not worthwhile. Just stay out of it because we can't really get anywhere.
What the Rambam said.
A slightly more sophisticated approach is from the Tosfos Yom Tov, Rabbi Yom Lipton Heller, who says the following in his comments on the Mishnah. There's no contradiction in the first place. God's knowledge of the future is the result of his observing the deed that the person is doing. Just as a person's observation of the deeds of his fellow in no way compels his fellow's actions, so too is it with God's observation of one's deeds. One cannot argue that because God knows the future actions of man, he therefore compels him, since before him there is no precedence and subsequence, as he is not governed by the laws of time. There is no future in God's reality. The whole of time is present to him. So just as our knowledge of the present has no compelling effect, so too his knowledge is always in his present and non-compelling. Well, what's he saying? He's saying in different words. And he finishes off by saying this is consistent with the conclusion of the Ravid, who compares God's knowledge to that of a stargazer. That God is above time. Being above time is something we can't really understand what that means, but being above time means that there's no past, present, and future. That God can look at the future the same way we look at the present. So I might watch what you're doing. I'm not making you do it, I'm observing what you're doing. God can look in the future the same way and observe the future because he's above time. You can't do that because you're human, so you're stuck in the present. The future is beyond you. But God is not stuck in any time, so therefore he can watch the future happen before it happened, because for him it's all the present. So therefore him watching you do it is no more forcing you than me watching you what you're doing right now. I'm not watching you. I'm not making you do it. I'm not deciding. I'm just observing. So too God is observing. This answer is just another way of putting the same thing as the stargazer, the looking into the future, but it's got the same flaw in it, and that is to say that God is a passive observer. That's not God. God, if he knows it's going to happen, he's causing it to happen. So it must be more than that. In fact, if we look deeper at what the Rambam said, this is what the Rambam was saying. When the Rambam said that God's knowledge is above our understanding, what he meant is that God's knowledge is not like our knowledge. Unlike our knowledge, which is as a result of things happening, God's knowledge is the cause of things happening. Rambam actually was going much deeper than the Ravid or the Tosfos Yom Tov, and saying that you can't give these answers that God is above time, or God is like a stargazer and not causing it, just watching it. You can't say that, because God is not the same as us. He causes things by knowing it has to happen. And so that's why Maimonides said that this is such a deep thing that we can't grasp it readily. But in a way, Rambam was giving an answer by saying that we can't grasp it, we can't understand this. That was an answer.
Yeah.
Unlike the Ravid's attack. Why did you give an answer? Don't ask a question and leave it dangling. No, that was his answer. His answer is, we can't understand God's ways, and that is the answer to why we have free choice. How so? Have a look at this one. Reb Nachman of Breslov, a Hasidic master, the great Reb Nachman, says the following thing. There are some subjects that are so deep, the human mind cannot encompass them. These subjects do not enter the mind but hover around it. This is the concept of envelopments. What does he mean? There are certain topics, particularly in Kabbalah and mysticism, that you can't really understand them. You can talk about it, but you can't really grasp it. Some subjects you study and you understand. What does it mean you understand something? It sinks into your mind, it's absorbed into your awareness, your intellect grasps it, you get it. Then there are certain things you just don't get it. You don't know what's going on. You can sit in a class, or you can read a book, or you can hear a lecture, and you hear the words, you hear the terminology, you speak the same language, but you don't know what he's talking about. Like, it doesn't hit you, it doesn't land in your brain, it just like hovers around. So you know sort of what the topic is, but you don't really grasp what's going on. Reb Nachman says there are certain topics that by definition are like that. By definition you cannot understand them. It's not that you're not smart enough. It's not that... Like chukim. There are certain things that you can talk about, you can discuss, and it's good to discuss, but you're not going to understand them. They're beyond your mind, they're beyond the capability of your mind. Not because you're not smart enough, because the brain cannot grasp these things. The current structure of the human mind cannot understand them. And so they surround you, they hover around you, but they don't sink in. So that's called envelopment, an enveloping idea. It's called makif in Hebrew. Something that surrounds your mind but doesn't quite go in. You don't quite get it. So we therefore encounter many subjects that man's mind cannot understand. These include the many paradoxes that perplex us. One example is the paradox of God's knowledge of the future and man's free will. What we're discussing is one of these topics that the more you discuss it, you know what you're talking about, but you don't quite get it. How does he know and we have free choice? Man's mind cannot grasp this concept. It is therefore like an envelopment, not entering the mind itself, but surrounding it from the outside. It is from this envelopment that the inner mind receives its life force. Meaning, by studying a topic that you don't really understand, by immersing yourself in spiritual ideas that are a bit beyond you, your mind is nourished by that, is expanded by that. If you only study things that you understand, so then you're only staying within the confines that you already have in your mind. You're not expanding yourself. By studying something that's a bit beyond, your mind is being stretched. It's like being beckoned to what's outside or beyond it. And so it's a good thing to do. Even though you don't understand it, even though in the end you're left, I didn't really get it. But the fact that you immerse yourself in an idea that's beyond you, that itself is good for the mind. It expands the mind. And this is one example. So, listen to his conclusion. This is the crux. One must realize that this is the main source of free will. As long as the intellect is not great enough to grasp the paradox of omniscience and free will, the God's knowledge of free will, as long as you can't understand it, the power of free will can exist. Man then has the power to choose life or the opposite. When do you have free will? Only when you don't understand why you have free will. If you would understand how it could be that God knows what you're going to do and you have free will, as soon as you understood it, you'd lose your free will. Why? Because if you would grasp God, so then you'd lose that freedom, that separateness. It's only as long as we don't get it that we have free will, that we do have free will. As if we would understand why,
Then you don't have free will.
you wouldn't have free will anymore. And he goes on to say that actually will happen. That it says when Mashiach comes, there's a statement of the sages that says that we will wear crowns on our heads. But the way it says it was we'll sit with crowns in our heads. Atrasem Burosheim, that we'll have crowns in our heads, not on our heads, but in our heads. Which, what does it mean? A crown means that which surrounds the head, and makif, an idea that's a bit beyond you. A crown in your head means that which is beyond will actually sink in. That when Mashiach comes, we will understand the godly truths that are totally beyond us right now. In our current state, we can't understand it. Then we will understand it. But by understanding it, we'll not have free choice anymore. For the good, in a positive way. We won't need free choice anymore. Now we need free choice to serve God, to bring purpose to our lives. Then we won't need to once we've reached the goal. So then we'll lose free choice. But why? Because we'll understand. We'll understand God, and then we won't have free choice anymore. So the fact we can't understand it, the fact that it's beyond us, is what maintains our free choice. As soon as we would understand God, we would lose our free choice. And that's in a way what Maimonides was saying. Rambam was saying that his thoughts are not your thoughts. His ways are higher than your ways. Because God is beyond us, because this is a paradox to us, that's why we have free choice. As soon as we got the answer, we'd lose the free choice.
Does the Alter Rebbe or the Lubavitcher Rebbe give an opinion on this?
So really, the explanation of the Rambam that I gave is from the Rebbe's letters. The Rebbe writes a letter. And the Alter Rebbe also does one, but it would take another class to explain it. He divides between the light of Hashem that's beyond all worlds and the light of Hashem that's within all worlds. And he says, and he says that light of Hashem that's within the world doesn't know the future, is limited. The light of Hashem that's beyond all worlds does know the future, because it's beyond all worlds. But that doesn't affect us, because it's beyond all worlds.
Are those
Because it's
lights
beyond.
separated?
They're really one. That's what Hashem Echad means. That God is really one. The two lights are one. But his knowledge of the future is on a level that's so high it doesn't affect us. And on the level of Hashem that we feel, he holds himself back from the future. That's what Tzimtzum comes, which is a whole other approach.